Well, welcome everybody. Thank you all for being here today. And thank you to Keshet and the Religious Action Center for partnering with us on this important and timely program on transgender inclusion, how Jews can show up for those across the gender spectrum. I am Shoshana Dweck, the Women of Reform Judaism Advocacy Vice President, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. As a teenager, Keshet's Youth Shabbaton was a deeply impactful experience for my now 21-year-old son, who is a trans man, in his journey to understanding and feeling both comfortable with and proud of himself, integrated with his Jewish identity as well. He shared his identity as a man with me nearly 5 years ago now. He's not at this program with us tonight because while he applies to carefully selected medical schools in states where he feels safe, he is currently an EMT and is living the dream at his firefighter training class tonight. He has been my teacher and my guide, and we are on this journey together. I'm grateful that all of you are here with us tonight to learn more about how we can show up as allies for our community and family members across the gender spectrum. They need our allyship to broadcast their voices and to keep them physically, mentally, and legally safe as the foundation to full and complete lives. And now, the technical bits. Since this call is very large, please keep yourself muted for the duration of the program. We will have a few minutes for audience Q&A at the end of the program. Please submit questions via private chat to the host, Jacob Greenblatt from the Religious Action Center, throughout the call. You can find the chat button at the bottom of your screen. We also recognize that chat may not be accessible to everyone, so you may submit questions to Jacob at jgreenblatt@rac.org as well, and that'll be in the chat. This program is being recorded, and this program is co-sponsored again by the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism, by Women of Reform Judaism, and by Keshet. Our organizations will follow up after the program with resources and opportunities to get involved. And now I'm very pleased to hand it over to John Cohen from Keshet.
Thank you so much. My name is John Cohen. I use he, him pronouns, and I am Keshet's Director of Community Mobilization. I'm so excited to be able to introduce the amazing speakers that we have tonight. So I'm going to share their bios. As I say the bios, instead of cheering, which we can't do on Zoom, I would love to see some fun reactions, some claps, some hearts, just, celebrate that they're here and now we all get to be here together tonight. So I will start with Lindsay Clark. Lindsay Clark is the Associate Director of the Human Rights Campaign's Transgender Justice Initiative and is coming to us today from Swanton, Ohio. Prior to joining the TJI team, they spent years on HRC's campaigns and organizing team doing electoral, legislative, and community engagement work in a number of states throughout the country. Their passions in the work include capacity building and prejudice reduction, so they're very excited to be joining us for this conversation. Let's take a moment for Lindsay Clark. And then we also have Kelly Whitehead. Kelly Whitehead is a rabbinical school and nonprofit Jewish management student at Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion. They participated in the Reform Movement's Juvenation Jew of Color Fellowship, where they learned to create and facilitate anti-racial bias training for Jewish professionals. They serve on the board of TRUA, the Rabbinic Call for Human Rights, and currently reside in Brooklyn, New York. Okay, love all of this that's happening. Okay, next is Eliana Kruskal, is a recent high school graduate who will be attending the University of Michigan in the fall to study theater design and production and sociology or neuroscience. He is very passionate about the many things he is involved in: political organizing, activism, dance, theater, working with neurodivergent kids and peers, to name just a few. Yay, Eliana. And then next we have Rabbi Dan Utley, is an associate rabbi at Temple Emmanuel in Dallas, Texas. He has served in Dallas since 2016 and focuses the work of his rabbinate on youth and teen engagement and outreach to historically underserved segments of the Reformed Jewish community. Alongside lay and staff partners, Rabbi Utley has overseen gender identity education and inclusion initiatives as well, and recently launching teen political advocacy through Temple Emmanuel focused on Texas legislation. He is a grateful husband to Rachel and proud father to Eitan, Judah, and Benji. Yay for that. And then the last and not least is Eli Mandel is a licensed clinical social worker and a lay leader at Temple Emmanuel in Dallas, Texas. Eli is a member of the trans community and has spent a large portion of his career as a therapist working primarily with trans folks. He also provides training and consultation to organizations on developing trans affirming practices. And that is our whole list. Did that in one breath. And we are going to start with hearing from Lindsay Clark, and I am very excited to turn it over to them.
Hi, thank you so much, John. That was beautiful. Thank you for walking through my very long bio. My name is Lindsay Clark. I'm the Associate Director for the Trans Justice Initiative, which is a part of HRC's foundation. The Human Rights Campaign Foundation and the Human Rights Campaign are one of the nation's largest LGBTQ advocacy organizations. We represent millions of members, and we've been doing the work for a long time. I have been with HRC for about 7 years now, and as John said, I used to work primarily in our political work, so doing electoral work and legislative work and some community outreach work. And now I'm very proud to be a part of our Trans Justice Initiative on the foundation side of our work. And I am primarily here today, I think, to help to ground us in the moment that the trans community is having in our world right now. And it's a pretty serious moment in really beautiful, good ways, and also some pretty serious ways. We've all had a relatively serious year. And so I want to acknowledge and honor that, and also share with you all some of the things that that make our work really specific. I'm also going to be getting some help from staff to put some links in the chat. So the first one of those is just our general hrc.org/transgender, where you'll find sort of the clearinghouse for all of our resources that we have around the work that we do, particularly in the trans community. And there's a lot of good stuff there. So I really encourage you to take a look. One of the big storylines for the trans community this year has unfortunately been that we are going through one of the hardest state legislative sessions that we've ever seen. In all the years that I've worked at HRC, except for this one, it's been one of my primary goals and roles to be a part of that work. And this year has been just a tremendous year for anti-LGBTQ legislation, and particularly anti-trans legislation. We've seen 252 bad bills this year, and that's in 40 states, which is most of them by a lot. And that's a lot more than we typically see. And as I said, about half of those are anti-trans bills. We also saw a tremendous number of those bills actually be enacted. A lot of years we see bad bills, but we do a pretty good job of battling them back. And this year, 24 bad bills were passed, including all kinds of things from sports bills to care bans. The places where we saw the most of those bills, I think we saw 8 in Arkansas and 5 in Tennessee and 4 in Montana, but we saw them, as I said, across the country. And that was something that in part we expected because, we had had such a positive political year. We now have a supportive presidential administration. We have both houses of Congress in support of trans folks and our broader queer siblings. And so we knew that there was going to be some backlash, but it was a really rough year from a legislative perspective. We're also going to post in the chat a link that talks a little bit more about the legislative session that we had and more about those bills. So if you want some more specifics about any of that stuff, you can check out that link and that'll show you a little bit more about that. We also this year saw more fatal violence against the trans community than we've ever seen. In last year, we've been counting these statistics since 2013, and last year we saw a total of 44 folks lose their lives to fatal violence within our community. The vast majority of those folks are Black and brown trans women. And this year, we already know of at least 29 folks who've lost their life, which means that we are on track to outpace that this year. And we can talk about the reasons why that happens. There's lots of reasons for it. We're going to post in the chat, one, a link to our fatal violence report, which runs through all the folks that we're aware of who've lost their life this year and in the years that we've been tracking it. And then we'll also post a report that we put out, which is called Dismantling the Culture of Violence. And it talks a lot about what we see as the factors that lead to that culture of violence and how we work to get rid of those things that are causing this epidemic of violence. And so in the same breath as, you know, having a supportive administration and seeing more trans folks in our private and social lives than we ever have before, greater visibility in a public setting, and making some real gains at national level, we're also seeing some fighting back against that, and a lot of folks having to talk about trans folks for the first time. And with those conversations comes some good and some hard. So I'm really excited that I'm here today. I'm so excited to talk to you all a little bit more, and I appreciate the time.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I am Kelly Whitehead. I'm a third-year rabbinical school student at Hebrew Union College, and I use both she, her, and they, them pronouns. I'm here today to provide some Jewish context to this conversation, which is very, very important. So thank you, Lindsay, for sharing what you just shared. If you look closely, our traditional Jewish texts have numerous examples that support the negation of a strict gender binary and an existence of a more open-minded and support of gender expansiveness. Even at the beginning of our texts in the book of Genesis, we read, and God created man in God's image, in the image of God, and God created him, male and female, but it says God created them. Adam and all people are created in the image of God, B'Tselem Elohim. This is a sentence, a phrase that's often used to prove that all people belong, a phrase that I see everywhere because I think it's really important, that everyone, regardless of their self-expression, is created beautifully. They look however God wants them to look. And I find that to be very popular and warming. And if you continue on in that verse, in that sentence, we see that the Hebrew phrase says, bara otam, in God created in them. So there's this Talmudic midrash by Rabbi Jeremiah ben Elazar that interprets that verse. This is a really, really, really old interpretation that says male and female, God created them. That means that this being, this first being Adam, was both male and female at the same time, which is more expansive than our traditional vision of Adam. And we can look at the Mishnah, an early written version of the oral text, which contemplates gender on a spectrum. It acknowledges the existence of what's known as tumtums, which are people who are sometimes a man and quote man, sometimes quote a woman. And while I see there's importance in highlighting the role of our old texts in our tradition, it does not always help in 2021, which was just mentioned as one of the worst years for anti-trans legislation. Transgender and gender expansive people are still not safe. In North America, state legislators have introduced historic anti-LGBTQ+ bills. They target gender affirming medical care, which is really essential, especially during the pandemic. They ban transgender youth from sports. And the violence disproportionately affects Black and brown transgender women. And there are Black and brown transgender women in our communities. This continues at a record level. So as Jews, we can keep this tradition, this midrash, this Talmud in our pocket on our journey towards justice for all. As Jews, we can learn, again, in our pocket, this text from the book of Micah. Jews are asked to follow God by practicing religion, and to do that, that means acting justly, loving, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with God. And we can act justly by standing up for all people and urging our communities to be more inclusive. We can stand up for trans Jews because that is holy work. And through the Talmud, this ancient text in our pocket, we learn Kol Yisrael Avarim Ze Bazeh, like all of Israel is responsible for one another. And we know that this, or we can know that this includes trans Jews. It can be as simple as calling someone by the name they wish to be called, by using correct pronouns and not making assumptions or asking questions that can make people uncomfortable. If you don't have to have all the information at once, you can just listen to what one person has to say and just truly, truly listen. That is another key tenet of our religion. One's discomfort with grammar is not as essential as one's safety in this space. And by creating communities where people can be safe, by having access to clearly labeled bathrooms and asking people of all gender identities to say their pronouns, trans and gender expansive people can feel more safe. Our communities can advocate for the safety for the entire community. And with that, people will feel more welcomed and more loved, which is crucial.
Thank you. Sorry, I accidentally muted myself. Yeah, thank you so much. I'm Eliana. Sorry, I use he, they pronouns. Thank you so much, Lindsay and Kelly, for that amazing framing and those texts, which I love to nerd out about. I'm a big Talmud nerd. And yeah, those are just some really incredible framing. So thank you. My name is Eliana, like I said, and I'm just here to sort of share a little bit about my story as a trans Jewish teen in the many communities in which I have experienced life, and what sort of related to that, what these anti-trans bills mean to me, and what I think we can do about them. So I'm just going to try and give a little summary of my story. So I came out to myself, and when I came out to myself first, I knew that my coming out to the world was going to have some real implications in all of my communities, but especially my Jewish communities. My mom's a rabbi, and my family has been Jewishly involved and engaged for my entire life. I went to day school earlier. We are very active in our shul, our synagogue. I'm really into Jewish learning. And I was really excited about all these things, but I was also really scared and really nervous to come out. Um, and for me, it was really incredible that when I came out, while there were certainly bumps in the road, I was welcomed with open arms and I was able to continue existing in these spaces as myself. And that was so crucial in my journey. That I didn't have to lose any of these spaces that were so important to me. Like learning Talmud is so important to me, right? And I was so scared that I wasn't going to be able to do that anymore. But not only was I able to continue doing that, but I was able to really like reach new communities and new ways of learning Talmud that I never would have had I never come out and met all these incredible people. So that's kind of one piece. And another piece was certainly my family, right? Um, Again, it was definitely not smooth sailing 24/7, but my family has been some of my biggest supporters along the way. Um, and that is such a privilege. And I'm so lucky for that. And I have had really access to such incredible opportunities in big part because of my family. Um, and I'm going to just talk about some of the incredible people that have had a big impact on my life and how I wish that every single trans Jewish teen had access to all of these incredible types of people. So I studied, like I said, I studied Talmud. I did at Teen Beit Midrash, which was a teen Beit Midrash in the Boston area where I live. And Rabbi Becky Silverstein was one of the teachers there, and he is just an incredible rabbi and mentor to me. He is transgender queer and is just such a beautiful Torah teacher in our community. And we're so lucky. I'm so lucky to know him. And just shout out to Keshet. Keshet has really changed my life. I attended my first Keshet Shabbaton when I was the summer before 8th grade. And I have evolved so much as a person since then. And that's in big part to the incredible, talented, knowledgeable friends that I have met there, the people that I'm so lucky to call my friends, and the mentors that I've met there who I really have just learned so much from and who I relish getting to talk to whenever I get the chance. Um, and all of those people are huge parts of my story and my journey. And I just want to mention that my story is one trans story, right? So my experience is by no means universal. I would say my experience is probably an outlier experience, if anything. But like both Lindsay and Kelly mentioned, um, Black and brown trans women are really at the forefront of the violence that our community faces. And myself as like a white trans masculine able-bodied person am from a real place of privilege. So I just wanted to recognize that. And I'm just going to take 1 minute to talk about the anti-trans bills and kind of just bring more context to those. So like Lindsay and Kelly mentioned, these are so incredibly harmful to trans people and trans youth. And the suicide attempt rate for trans youth is between like 30% and 50% of trans youth will attempt suicide at some point in their life. And that is just one piece to this trans bills, but these anti-trans bills really will only increase that number. And Jamie's gonna put a link to the chat to a video of Kai Shapley, who is a 10-year-old trans girl, speaking to her Texas legislators about some of these anti-trans bills that I highly recommend you watch because it's so moving and really just incredible. And I've been so privileged to not only have these accepting communities, but also to have had access to such life-saving medical care that if many of these anti-trans bills would be passed, so many youth would not have access to. And like I said, all of that medical care, while not for everyone, was really life-changing for me and is really life-changing for a lot of people. And so it's really crucial that we fight against these bills. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks, Ileana. My name is Dan Utley. I'm a rabbi in Dallas, Texas. I use he, him pronouns. And in our community, we began about 4 years ago with an initiative to help our synagogue and our schools be more gender inclusive and aware of everyone's diverse experiences of what it means to be a human being as they grow up and evolve in our community. We brought in Keshet and involved our WRJ, our Women of Reformed Judaism, who was very helpful in helping us bring Keshet to town, and also our Jewish Federation, in order to be able to convene the community, the Jewish community in Dallas, to speak about gender identity, because it wasn't something that was on the topic of conversation in most of the Jewish organizations here in town. And one of the reasons we did that was, at least for us at Temple Emmanuel, learning from our partners in communities of color with whom we were doing justice work, teaching us on a regular basis that if we were truly going to be a community that was furthering justice, we had to start at home. We had to start in our own walls and being the most inclusive, expressive, caring community that we can be. And so we've been working very hard to lift up trans voices in our community, to celebrate our LGBTQ congregants and make sure that the message is for our community that everyone is welcome. And that's not just something that we say, that's something that we do through our actions, through the actions of congregants. We certainly aren't always perfect. We're still learning and we're still growing. And we are learning every day from people around us who are living this experience in their daily lives. With me tonight is one of our lay leaders in this initiative, Eli Mandel. I'm pleased to turn this over to him.
Thanks. Excuse me. Thank you, Rabbi Ellie, and everyone who's contributing to this panel. It's amazing. I'm Eli. I use he, him pronouns. I do want to briefly talk a little bit more about the efforts around trans equity and belonging at Temple Emmanuel in Dallas, both from the perspective of a trans congregant and from that of a professional who works significantly with the trans community. So I moved to Dallas about 4 years ago from Philadelphia with my partner and was admittedly a little bit nervous about coming to Dallas. You know, I had my community established in Philly, but really didn't have that in Dallas. And I wasn't sure what I was walking into. So I joined Temple Emmanuel, still with some hesitancy around what it means to be an out trans Jew in Texas. But my trans identity quickly became the thing that strengthened my connection to Temple. So when Rabbi Eli asked me to help in guiding what the process might look like for Temple's inclusion efforts, I was really excited on a professional level because that's what I do, but also on a personal level, it kind of let me breathe out a little bit. And I guess that's kind of what I want to get across from the congregant perspective, is that even beginning this work, or putting it out there that this is the direction you're headed, can start to develop that sense of belonging and maybe even safety for some trans Jews. And that doesn't mean it'll happen overnight, or that just because you're making an effort, people should automatically, you know, trust what's happening, because they deserve some skepticism, to have some skepticism. But I do want to highlight that visibility and public recognition of the trans community really matters, and it's a huge first step. And then as a lay leader helping with these efforts, I was able to do some introductory training with Temple educators, congregants, and the rabbis, which was really fun, and also meet with the task force that was working on ways to make our spaces and policies feel a bit more affirming for trans folks. I would imagine that most people sitting in on this call have some interest or knowledge related to the trans community, I think. But it is worth saying that a lot of people in our congregations won't or don't, which means that education and a strong stance from leadership really becomes critical. And Rabbi Utley's unapologetic influence in leading these efforts really helped others get on board more quickly. And that's not to say he didn't take time to talk with those who wanted more information or more education, but he didn't really waver in why we were doing this, the importance of this work. So kind of leads me to my next and my last point because of time, but I do want to put it out there that becoming a trans affirming environment is a culture shift, and it's a really big deal. And transphobia can exist in every facet of an organization, knowingly or not. And because of that, it's really important that people leading this charge are professionals, right? Like anything else. And I think it's important to have congregants who are in the community certainly involved as much as they can be. And we also don't want it to be a space where these community members are putting themselves in an unknowingly harmful situation. So definitely use the resources available to you in your congregation. If you have somebody who does do this work, all the better. But do be prepared to bring in outside resources if need be. And if that's something your congregation isn't quite ready to do, it just might be worth taking a minute reflecting to see how ready you all are for this change. And I wish it was as easy as one person giving a training one time and then everything's changed. But it really is a process that requires repeated intervention, evaluation, examination. And we want to be sure not to put the very people we're trying to help into a potentially harmful situation. But if you're ready to bring in some outside resources and get started on this work, I have no doubt that your congregations will be all the better for it, and that trans Jews and even allies in your congregation will gain the new respect for the efforts that you're making. So thank you, and I'm really happy to be here.
Thank you all so much for sharing your wisdom with us and for spending this time and sharing your stories. I have a few questions. Some of them are going to be for all of you, and some of them are for specific folks. So I will start with the first general question for everyone, which is, what does an inclusive Jewish community look like to you? So the question is, what does an inclusive Jewish community look like to you personally? And just to keep things going smoothly, you can each answer in the same order that you presented. So we'll start with we'll start with Shoshana, and then we'll go into Lindsay, and we'll continue down the line.
So I had the privilege of being with my son representing our synagogue at a Pride festival, and a 12 or 13-year-old child with their mother came up to the table and had never found a place. And I think an inclusive society is the look on their face when they realized that their pronouns were the same as those of the person who was representing the synagogue. And suddenly there was a place where B'nai Mitzvah seemed to be a possibility. That look is inclusion.
Well, I think for me, creating an inclusive space in my head would mean creating a safer space, and that's really intentional and it's hard work. But I think one of the best things that can happen to you is if you're hypervigilant because you're a part of a marginalized community and you live your life unsure about how safe you are in any situation, finding a place where you're not only safe within one of your identities, but with your whole self, and that you can bring your whole self and your whole soul to rest in a place, the weight that comes off of you realizing that you are in a safer spot it's really remarkable and incredible. I think Eli was the one who started to mention that feeling. But I think, yes, trying to create a place where folks can breathe out is so important always, but especially in a year like the year that we're having this year.
That was so beautiful. I think a truly inclusive space is one that requires work for all, and one in which there are no barriers, in which all the tent is wide open, and that's not easy. It requires a lot of work on behalf of those who are not used to it, and it's one that is an ongoing process. I think Eli said it's not one training and then you're done. It's work.
Yeah, I think an inclusive space certainly does not happen by accident, and it definitely doesn't happen overnight. And I think it has to go beyond training and education. I think it has to be community based and community oriented, right? And I think an inclusive space focuses on intersectionality. And I think an inclusive space is one where no member of the community has any doubt in their mind, any hesitation, that when they show up in that space, they're going to be not just accepted, not just tolerated, but they're going to feel truly integrated into the community, and like they can take a deep breath, like Lindsay said.
When I think about an inclusive Jewish community, my head goes to the experience growing up at Jewish summer camp, where it felt like that was the place where one could really be themselves, could fully be themselves. I think it's no coincidence. Like the first real experience for me of witnessing inclusion in terms of trans-identified people was at a Jewish summer camp in our movement. And I think the more that space is special because of the sort of sacred boundaries that are placed around it. It's a closed environment with caring people and role models. So I think the more we can create caring places that are safe for everyone, the more people feel like they can be themselves and be their true selves in different parts of the Jewish community. And that's hard to do at the level of the synagogue, where people are coming and going and communities are changing and you're interacting in larger circles. So it's in many ways like a future redemption wish and hope and dream to look towards.
Yeah. Feels inclusive, like automatically my head kind of goes to like, oh, a perfect space where nobody says anything that's going to hurt me.
Is glitching.
So glitching.
You're back now.
All right, can you hear me okay?
Perfect.
Okay. So yeah, so when I hear like what's an inclusive space, I like go to this dream world of like nobody says anything that's going to make anybody upset, and it's just not realistic. I'm trans and I say things that offend trans folks, right? Everybody messes up. So I think for me, it's that intentional process of creating a space that feels safe, which is easier said than done, but also an accountable space. So, you know, if I am sitting in a room and somebody says something that kind of would rub somebody the wrong way, as a trans person in the room, not being the one who has to say, hey, that offended me and here's why, but having other people in the room be able to say like, hey, what's going on? What just happened, right? So yeah, a setting that has some accountability is always nice.
Thank you so much. And now our next question, which I will ask and then we'll do in the reverse order, is Eliana really segued this one really well, because this is about intersectionality, and we put the definition in the chat, but just to cover, the intersectionality is basically the intersection of various marginalized identities. So as Jewish people, we are a non-majority faith in the United States. As queer people, we are not a majority sexual orientation. As trans people, we may not be the majority gender identity. So all of these identities, people of color, women, it all comes into play with the way that we are experiencing the world. And so the question that we have is, what does intersectional activism mean to you? And how is it showing up in your everyday life?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I'm somebody who within the trans community has so much privilege, and it's necessary to acknowledge. I think intersectional activism, especially within a congregation for me, looks like what Kelly kind of had said, where they said trans, like Black, brown, trans women do exist in your congregations, right? And I think it's very easy for people to make the assumption that they don't, or, if I can't see somebody or if I don't know something about somebody, then, it doesn't exist. And so I think for me, a lot of it is being really intentional in the Jewish community that, like, even if I don't know something about somebody, or if I'm not sure what exists or what doesn't exist, like making sure that I'm still trying my best to create a setting that is inclusive of people who don't have as much privilege, so that they feel welcome. And if they, want to come out or share something with me, great. But if not, totally valid as well. So just trying to create as safe and inclusive of an environment as I can for people who may or may not be in our congregation.
I think for me, in my personal activism, it's trying my best each and every day to be aware of my privilege, similar to what Eli said. As a cisgender, white, Ashkenazic male in the Jewish community, there's not a lot of minority categories that I fit in. And so I feel like my job is to do my best to become the best ally I can be. And that's an experience of education and ongoing lifelong learning. So a lot of my activism is listening and reading and learning. And in terms of everyday life and seeing it, I think the recent conflict, resurgence of conflict in Israel in the last several months has really highlighted the intersectional lives that we live, and really identifying with the pain in many different aspects of that community, and not just with Israelis. Our community, at least in Dallas, it brought to light a whole new perspective for our teens and young people. And so that was a way for people who couldn't have seen the issue of intersectionality in their lives before, all of a sudden it was in their faces in new ways. And so that opened up other places for our conversation and our learning about gender, about racism, about local issues as well. So it's, again, looking at the experiences in our lives and seeing where we can learn from them.
Yeah, sort of touching on what Dan touched on, I think that one of the really key pieces to intersectionality for me is sort of recognizing the weight that all of our identities hold. And something I've learned, a phrase that I've learned recently that's really been sticking with me that just came into my head immediately when you asked this question, John, was from a Black trans queer activist online that they said, like, your whiteness is heavier than your queerness. To like white queer people, obviously. And yeah, that's just really been sticking with me. And I think that it's really important to think about, of course, our marginalized identities and what needs we have because of them, but also how we can support those, right? Just like Eli and Rabbi Ali talked about, those who are less privileged. And I think that a part of that in terms of like the everyday life thing is just having an accountable space, like Eli said, and calling people in when not only are they maybe doing things that harm your marginalized community, but all of the other marginalized communities, and making real concrete steps towards change for people of all marginalized communities. So that's like making our spaces accessible for disabled people and for neurodivergent people. That's making our spaces welcoming and inclusive for people of color. That's making our spaces inclusive for Jews who may have less Hebrew background, right? Just like to name a few things. So yeah.
I think intersectionality is key to everything we do. And if we want to move forward and become more inclusive, we have to bring all of our identities with us at the same time. And it's one thing to be aware of your privilege and to hold it and know your different identities. And then there's another thing to take action with it. So for me, who is Black and queer and non-binary and like obviously Jewish, I might not always want to speak up, but I should know that, like, okay, I have more of a right to speak up. Or for people who have less marginalized identities, knowing that it's okay to take a step back. And that's actually a huge example of leadership, is stepping down and stepping back.
Yeah, totally love that. I mean, y'all could just talk and I'll just sit and stare at you with loving eyes. But I think one thing that we've already touched on, but I just want to underline it and bold it, is that allyship is an activity. It's not a destination, and you know, you got to keep working at it. There's no way to see what you don't see unless you go and find someone who can see it. And so, you know, figuring out ways to see deeper into what are the real barriers to access and to safety in the spaces we create. And those barriers will be, they'll seem enormous, and there will be tons. And that is a lot of exciting work to do to pull down those barriers to access. And I think intersectionality means you look at that problem of who's here, who isn't, and why not from as many angles as you possibly can, so that even if folks aren't with you yet, if they came looking for shelter, they could find it. Because I think that's one of the hardest things in the world, is to look for a safer space, and find it for maybe like 3/4 of yourself. So, yeah. Shoshana, more beautiful things.
So I always prefer to center my son's voice and experiences in this kind of a space. And I can share with you that as his mom, my experience of his intersectionality is an experience of pain. So he came out in senior year of high school, showed up at university, a nice liberal arts university, and science and all the good things that he loves. And the maybe 20 trans identifying kids on campus. And the first meetup was pizza on Yom Kippur. Now, the reason I say pizza is because he's also dairy allergic. So that was it. He did not go back for 4 years. He may have performed in Rocky Horror, but he never went back to the trans meetup group. And I also saw his joy at the Pride Parade this weekend in New York City, that someone on a motorcycle with a Jewish pride flag was something really compelling for him. And of course, all of the attacks that came during the recent fighting from his LGBTQ community in social media, that he felt that he was being silenced. He does not feel safe being himself. So maybe that helps folks who are listening and watching to understand what that intersectionality can feel like, to feel untethered from all of your communities because of the nature of your intersectional reality. And I see it in the tears and in the pain. And so I think that my role as an activist with that is to know at every moment, we do not know who does not have a room. We keep making rooms for people, and there is always someone who isn't strong enough to ask for a room yet, or who we aren't listening to for whatever that attribute of their identity is. And that humility informs everything that I do. And hopefully it means that people find me to be safe for whatever they are carrying in them, whatever's heavy in them, to build off of what Eliana said.
Wow, thank you all so much for all of that. Let's take a moment, let's take a breath. Let's see some hearts and some thumbs ups and some hands clapping in the rest of the chat. I feel like you've just given us so much, and so just really want to honor, appreciate, acknowledge all of that. Now we have some questions that have come in. They are for mostly specific folks, but some may be relevant for more than one person to answer. So we will see. The first question is for Lindsay, and the question is, what can folks who live in states that are already supportive of LGBTQ rights do that can have an impact that is like beyond their own communities?
Yeah, totally. So, I mean, there are still absolutely ways that you can help to support the advocacy in places for which that isn't true. Our patchwork of a country at the moment has plenty of pockets. And one of the things that's been sort of beautiful about a virtual environment is it's easier than ever to do that, to really have an impact anywhere you want to have an impact. But there's also a lot to be said for taking the successes that you've had and making sure that you are helping others to achieve similar success. And so doing what you can to continue to be an ambassador for the things that you care about and the policies that have worked, and talk about the issues that you care about relentlessly with anyone who will listen. Everyone has a set of humans who listen to them a little more closely than other humans. And there are people who will never hear my voice, but they might listen to you saying the same thing. And so figuring out, how in my circles can I have an impact on these issues that I care about and for these folks that I care so deeply about. You're saving us the legwork, and it's a lot easier when someone loves you is honestly what it's about. And so thinking about who are the folks who love you, who are the folks who listen to you, and let's go talk to them about trans people. That's what I would say.
Thank you. Totally. The next question is for Eli, and it is, what can your congregant allies do outside of the synagogue to continue the inclusion work?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think to an extent kind of goes off of what Lindsay was saying too, right? It could be stuff inside your congregation or outside, but if you are somebody who is an ally, recognizing allyship as an active thing, right? Not just, posting on social media about it, but also, touching people who will listen to you, right? So if you're somebody's uncle, or if you're somebody's niece or nephew, the chance of them listening to some random person or like reading an article about trans rights or something like that is less likely to affect them in a way of a family member saying, hey, do you know about this issue? Like, let's talk about it. Let's talk about, what you think is okay and not. So I really am like here for small conversations. I think that's kind of how progress gets moving. Totally appreciate all the big system people. Y'all are amazing. I'm a therapist. I do small conversations. So that's what I encourage. All the small conversations, I think they really lead to significant change.
Thank you. Kelly, you were our Torah scholar this evening. So this question is for you. And it is, are there examples of Jewish rituals around gender affirmation transitions, a Hebrew name change, a mikveh, that seems that are other ways that synagogues and communities can celebrate this journey?
This is an excellent question. I was very worried I was going to get a big stumper for only being a third year in rabbinical school, but there are so many rituals that fireworks that are being created that are out here. I'm also glad you asked this. When I was sitting next to Mishkan Gaveh, where Pride dwells, this is a new compilation of prayers that are just for LGBTQ Jewish life and rituals. So there's one a blessing and celebration of living as non-binary, which happens one day, or a blessing for my gay son on Friday nights. I'm sure someone can easily put this in the chat. It's just on the CCAR website. A simple, I don't really quite remember exactly the question because I was so excited that that I can bring up this book, and that it was right next to me and not behind me. There is ritual out there and Torah supporting. There's Safaria.com, which is a great use of a great resource for text sheets. If you look in words like inclusion, trans activism, just gender inclusive, whatever keywords you want, you can put that right into Safaria as well. Or, reach out to your local rabbi or a Jewish educator, and they could put you in touch as well with specific questions for your needs for Jewish rituals. I also know my partner went to a baby naming, but it would, instead of a baby naming, which is done typically for girls after, assigned girls 7 days after they're born, kind of instead of a bris or whenever after they're born. My partner attended a renaming for an adult in their 20s who, embraced this new name. And that was a really beautiful ritual that they kind of created themselves and used a bunch of these prayers. So it's totally, make your own and go from there as well.
Thank you. Eliana, this one's for you. We're looking for a feel-good story. What is something that has happened or someone who has been in your Jewish community that has made you feel particularly welcomed and whole?
Oh my God, it's so hard to choose. I'm gonna not say someone that I already said. Ooh, okay. Oh, here's like an answer that is sort of not the first thing I thought of, which sometimes I like to say not the first thing I thought of because I think it's like it gets a more unique perspective. I don't know. But like I said, as we were getting on the call to like prep, I'm a camp counselor. And I'm a camp counselor at a Jewish day camp that is a super like traditional Jewish day camp. It's super like been around forever. Everyone who's there has been there forever. And just the kind of stuck in its ways in it's a lovely camp. It's a really amazing place, and it definitely has some room to grow. But there's a new director this year, and she is really incredible. And just since the moment I walked on onto camp on the first day of orientation, I already knew her, but I hadn't been back at camp since I came out as trans. I was there as a camper, and then I was gone for a few years. And now I'm working there, and she has really just made me being back at camp so much less stressful than I thought it was going to be. I walked in, she asked me if I could come into her office so she could talk about the bunk I was working in. And then she was talking to someone and she referred to me and she said he, and then she was like, wait, sorry, is it he or they? And I was like, oh, you can use either, like both are fine. She was like, awesome, thanks for letting me know. And like just like that's one example of how she's just made it easy. But yeah, she's awesome. And yeah, thank you for asking that question.
Thank you. And our last question, because we are running out of time and I keep getting private messages that we're running out of time. So the last question is for Dan, and it is that Eli mentioned this, and a bunch of questions have come in that in the work that you're doing, you are guiding your congregants to understanding why inclusion matters. How are you approaching and handling the pushback from congregants who may not be ready to like really understand kind of the importance of trans inclusion?
Thanks, John. That's a great question. And to whoever posed it, it's excellent. We often hear, at first, I would say at first, when we first started bringing this up in the community more publicly and on a regular basis, and not just in celebration of Pride Month, we would hear the question, I was brought up to treat everybody the same. I try to see everyone the same. I don't see color. Like this is a trope that we hear other places. So why should I need to worry about something that affects such a small portion of our population? So we hear that. We hear people say, Shabbat services should be a place where we come to have respite and to rest and renew ourselves. It should be a place where I can bring my children and not have to be hearing about concerns that don't belong in Shabbat services. We've had that comment before. And I think our response to it is, these are Jewish values: to embrace everyone b'tselem Elohim, to celebrate everyone for who they are and who they are becoming in their lives, to try to equate the trans experience with other experiences of human development. At least for me, that's how I've come to understand it. And I don't mean to put that experience on anybody else, but that's how people develop into different people, into different human beings, and to help people be able to see all of these different experiences as normal, as opposed to as different than, I think is the way we approached it. And at the end of the day, to know that even the largest synagogue isn't going to be the synagogue for every person. We have to stay true to our values and to our mission and to our vision and align to those things. And if people really find themselves uncomfortable with that and outside of it, they'll find a different synagogue. But it's important to us. And it's important, I think, for the Jewish community to really stay true to what our texts teach us for so many centuries.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank all of you so much. Can we turn off speaker mode and get on gallery view really quick? I just want to, yes, okay, great. So if everyone just go on gallery view, we just heard so many amazing things. We have 3 minutes left to wrap this up, but before we do that, can everyone just hearts, clapping hands, googly eyes, like whatever you want to do. Like, thank you so much to everyone who shared tonight. It was so amazing to hear from you. Great. Okay. And now I'm going to take the spotlight back to finish this out. So thank you all. This was mentioned briefly, but the RAC, URJ, WRJ, and a bunch of other Jewish organizations have been working to help pass the Equality Act, which is a bill that would add gender identity and sexual orientation to the protected classes of the Civil Rights Amendment. And we would love, love, love if the folks on this call could go to our action site and let their senators know that this is something that matters to the Jewish community. So often, especially when it comes to LGBTQ rights, faith is used as a reason not to support LGBTQ communities. And as Jewish people, we can reclaim that narrative and we can say that it's not despite our faith that we support LGBTQ rights. It is a Jewish value, it is a part of our faith, and we would not be Jewish people existing in this world if we didn't do it. And so all of these resources will be coming out in the follow-up email. If you have any questions that are coming in after, feel free to email Jacob. We will do everything that we can to answer them and get all the resources out. And okay, I don't need to be on spotlight anymore, but thank you everyone and have a good night, and we will be in touch very soon.